Hi, the SI meteorologist Paul Dorian here. As we approach the middle part of April, I thought we'd take a look at the sun and give an update on solar cycle number 24. In the early part of March, there was a humongous sunspot, some 4 times the size of the Earth, that was very active, and it sent several coronal mass ejections towards the Earth over a couple of week period. That particular sunspot rotated around to the backside of the sun and actually re-emerged just a couple of weeks ago, but in a much weakened state. Well, now take a look at the sun right now, and it's very quiet. Almost looks completely sunspotless. And again, here's where that sunspot was in the early part of March. It rotated around the sun and moved on the backside, and then re-emerged as a much smaller, much weakened state. And now that has completely disappeared, and the sun is kind of eerily quiet. This is a little bit unusual given the fact that most solar scientists expect the solar max for this particular cycle to be around the middle part of 2013. So again, this is another indication that this particular cycle will be quite a weak cycle, one of the weakest one in decades, and that continues a trend that we'll take a look at over the next couple of minutes. Well, in terms of the trend for these sunspot cycles, it's down. This is where we stand right now, right about here for solar cycle 24. Now look at the peak expected here about middle part of 2013 or so, but this is in terms of number of sunspot numbers, and this is about 100 for this particular peak. Now the last cycle that peaked around the year 2000, cycle number 23, was a little more active, a little stronger than this particular cycle, and that continues kind of a long-term trend that these sunspot cycles are in a downward trend. In fact, let's take a look at a longer-term picture here. And here's a longer term view. This is a look at the monthly average sunspot numbers. This is where we stand right now with solar cycle number 24. But look at the trend now from 22 to 23 to 24. There is a downward trend, and it looks like that can continue into the next cycle, solar cycle 25. Some solar scientists are now expecting that to be even weaker than this week, which is the weakest in decades, this particular cycle, number 24. Now, what is the relevance of this? Well, there certainly are some studies that suggest that when you have long-term weak solar cycles, that can lead to some global cooling in terms of temperatures. There have been periods in the past where we've had very weak cycles for decades at a time. In fact, let's take a look now at a long-term map. And here's a real long-term a map of the sunspot observations going all the way back to the 1600s. A couple of time periods that many of you may have heard of, the Maunder minimum as well as the Dalton minimum. These were periods where the sun was very inactive in terms of sunspots for decades at a time, and most of these minimum periods were associated with cold global temperatures. So we'll continue to monitor that situation now. Not only is the sun, of course, crucial to the global temperatures, but also the Pacific Ocean. Let's take a look at the update there. Well, in terms of the Pacific Ocean, which is the most important driver of climate here on the Earth, of course the sun is the most important of all, but this is the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, otherwise known as the PDO, and it seems to have slipped into a cold phase a few years ago, and sometimes these cold phases or warm phases can last for 2 or 3 decades. So the combination of what appears to be weakening solar cycles over the next 5 or 10 years, combined with the fact that we've entered a cold phase in the Pacific Ocean, leads many to believe that we could be headed for some global cooling over the next 5 or 10 years. So we will continue to update the situation on the sun here at the SIweather.com for the next several months. That's it for now. I'm the SI meteorologist, Paul Dorian.